Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of RadialSpark Radio. With us today is myself, Michael Rockford, and we also have Justin Ludlow on the line. And then in the background, as always, Peyton Gherkin controlling our stream. And so if you see any technical issues, it's definitely his fault.
Yep,
Hello.
that's
me.
why he's here, so we can blame him.
Yeah,
I was gonna say controlling.
right. He's just winging it back there, let's be honest. But
I mean,
guys,
we're just winging it up here.
I mean, don't give him away the secrets. Jeez.
Sorry, I just thought we were easing back in because it's been a little while since we've done one of these. We gotta have a little fun with everybody.
Yeah, it is. We've been away on some business travel, whatnot. There's been a series of world tours that I hope some of you guys who listen to this have had a chance to enjoy. Justin and I got back from a long trip going up to New York City World Tour, and we were hoping to try to get some live action shots there, but it just didn't have time, didn't work out. So we've got a little bit of a backlog and stuff to catch up to in the next couple of weeks. So we're going to be releasing an episode, a couple of episodes in the next couple of weeks to try to catch up. But today, today's episode is going to be special. This is a topic that we're going to talk about, or that we have talked about a lot in the past with customers, Salesforce AEs, solutions engineers, architects, CIOs, CTOs, salespeople, and it comes down to where is the right place to build your community. And by community, I mean your web portal for your customers, your website, your partner portal, all these other things, portal, communities, Experience Cloud. They rebranded 1,000 different ways. Salesforce has got amazing marketing for that. But the reality is it's that where do you want your website? Where are your customers going to interact with you? Where are your partners going to interact with you? And what's the right platform for that? And the reason why we're going to talk about this is because it really comes down to a lot of nuance. And we've written an article to go over it, and Justin's helped me author this one. But this is a common problem you come up with when you're looking at, hey, do I build this on my Salesforce Force.com CRM? Or do I build this on Heroku and integrate that with Salesforce? What's the right way? When do I use what? How does this work? What's the right cost? What kind of costs am I looking at on either end? And we're going to demystify that for all you guys today to talk about where to build your community, Experience Cloud or Heroku. So, Justin, if we want to pull up that article, or rather Peyton, rather.
I was going to say, we're going to make Peyton do this.
Because again, if he screws it up, then it's not your fault.
Yeah, then I don't want any of the responsibility for this. I'm just here to run my mouth and have fun. Speaking of which, if your buildup was any longer, I was going to chime in and say, don't worry, guys, it's not AI this time. We promise.
Well, we might throw in, no, just kidding. Like
today, we might a little bit. But I'm going to try not to.
Right.
That's next week.
Okay, I've been told we're on an AI-free diet this week, guys. So if I say the word again, slap on my wrist. All right, Peyton, are we good to go with the article? Excellent, thank you. So, by and large, for those of you who have looked at building communities before, things like that, you're probably already aware the two places in the Salesforce ecosystem where you would most commonly build your community are going to be either on Salesforce Experience Cloud or custom built on Heroku. This is something that's been around since Experience Cloud was called Community Cloud. Like over several generations, these have kind of been the two tools for bringing it out. When you work directly with Salesforce team members and resources, like Experience Cloud's almost always going to be the first one they bring out, and usually with good reason. So what I'm hoping to do here is talk about, for each of the factors that's going to go into your cost of ownership for the community, what you need to accomplish or design around for your community, where are the differences, why would you choose each? So with that said, Peyton, I'd like to go to the key decision points and just start talking about, there's effectively 5 major ones, and we're going to dive into each of these a little deeper. First point's going to be cost analysis. So something to be aware of, both Heroku and Experience Cloud are sold by Salesforce, but they are priced differently and their price scales differently. I'm going to get into that in a second, but as you're thinking about how am I going to pay for my community and how much do I want to budget for it, there is a serious consideration there that we're going to dive into. Next up, technology, buy versus build. So Experience Cloud is more on the buy side. With Experience Cloud, you're going to get your WYSIWYG editor, some things like that. You have a very fast time to market. It's designed for very closely coupled with your CRM communities. So a lot of things are assumed, a lot of things come out of the box. On the Heroku side, you're looking at more of a build. So you're going to be able to use just about any language or framework that you'd want to develop your community, which might give you access to particular tooling, things you need like that, that may lean you more towards that end of the spectrum. We're going to get into that a little bit deeper as well. Third consideration is, and I don't like the way I said that because it's design considerations. So this is design considerations around your, like what your portal's going to do or what your community is going to do. And so with that, Experience Cloud being a native Force.com offering is going to be pretty closely tied to it. Heroku, you have a lot more flexibility. You can mirror Salesforce, you can diverge from it. You have a lot of options. So there's going to be some things we're going to dive into there. We say performance here. What this really boils down to, and what we're really going to dig into, is the fact that communities from Experience Cloud living on the Force.com platform also fall under Salesforce governor limits, which you guys hear me talk about a lot on this show. So when we talk about what are the business processes, what are the things that you're doing from your community, if you have heavy lifting, if you have things that might be stretching Salesforce governor limits, bringing that over to Heroku, there is a performance and a no limits aspect to that to be able to perform specific business functions or technical functions off the Force.com platform while still being closely integrated. We're going to dive into that a little deeper as well. And then last but not least, and this is, I feel like this is perhaps the highest level consideration that we've left to the end, the go-to-market strategy. So it sounds stupid to say it, but Experience Cloud lives inside the same Force.com instance as your Sales Cloud or your Service Cloud. It's designed to be tightly coupled. But that means that, like, if you're delivering a branded experience, things like that, let's say it's something that you have multiple brands that you're delivering experiences for, communities for, things like that, all of those experiences are closely tied to your singular Salesforce org where they might be hosted. If you have a business model or a strategy where you might be spinning up brands with the intention of eventually divesting them, selling them off, doing things like that, you may want to build your external facing communities and properties to have just enough separation of concerns that they can easily be split from your core business as part of like your long-term go-to-market strategy, business development strategy. So there's also business factors completely separate from the community itself that would go into how you should build this and where you should build this. So these are going to be the 5 high level we talk about. There are also a couple special considerations we're going to get into. I'm going to take us back to cost analysis, and I'm going to dive in there on the deep end.
Yeah. So Justin,
go ahead, Mike. I was going to say before I run my mouth, stop me.
Yeah, so I think we've kind of talked at the surface level here about all of these, and when we look at these key decision points, like these aren't this isn't an exhaustive list. There's some other things that we're not going to cover today. There's a lot of nuance into making this decision, but these 5 are the biggest, most common ones. And like the first one, and the reason why we talk about cost analysis here, and it's labeled number 1, is really when it comes down to initial build and also scale, like you talked about earlier.
Yes.
And this is the big thing that always comes up, trips people up. And the short version, I'll let Justin dive into the details here. But the short version is that Experience Cloud, its cost comes in a per user, per license, per month feature. So it scales linearly with your user base. Or alternatively, you can buy logins per month. And again, that generally scales relatively linearly depending on your use case. Like sometimes you need a lot of users, but they only access once a year, once a quarter, once a month, whatever it is. And they're not hitting your website or your experience or your portal very often. But that linear scale, it's like the more users you have and or the more they log into your website, the more your cost is. And it's very predictable, but it also, that linear scale is not optimal for a ton of different use cases. And so that's usually the biggest like key decision point there. It's like, how many users do I have? How often are they hitting this? How are they interacting with my portal? Are they like on it like my app every day? Are they doing like, these are the business questions that you need to think about. Are they purchasing stuff from it every day, every hour? Are they downloading videos, doing learning management? Is this like, how frequently are they working in it, initializing this application? And that's where the Experience Cloud pricing really just says, hey, like this is just going to go up and it's going to keep going up, where Heroku doesn't do that whatsoever. Heroku, depending on how you build it, scales with literal like CPU usage and memory usage and database usage. Like, so its scale is much more logarithmic when you look at it. You make that initial purchase, that's a big point, and then it doesn't, like, so long as you buy what you need, it's not going to scale up with your user base. It's not going to scale linearly as you grow. It's much more logarithmic. It's much more flat, assuming you design your application properly. And these are the two things, at least in my experience, Justin, and you know, you and I have pitched these deals and scoped these deals a lot. But the initial build cost, I feel like with Heroku tools where we have like Butter CMS, where you can get a WYSIWYG and a headless CMS or non stuff like that, and you're doing custom lightning builds or whatnot, anything where you start getting like really custom on force.com, I feel like the implementation costs from the third-party partner, sometimes you find a little bit of savings just going with Experience Cloud if you keep it more vanilla, but usually that's not what we're seeing when you're doing this evaluation. Well, it's usually the user cost is where it gets you. Am I wrong?
I would say you're right, because the fundamental thing that I think you were cluing at, but that you didn't quite say explicitly, is the fact that in anything you do in IT, paying for infrastructure almost always scales more favorably than paying for users. It's just because when you're paying for users, there's a whole bunch of software layers that go into like, oh, there's an application, not just infrastructure. We're covering the cost of the app, the services, the everything, and the users that are incurring usage on it. There's a lot that gets baked into there, plus the profit margin of the vendor providing it. When you're paying for stuff at an infrastructure level, you're literally only paying for what your system uses. You build it optimally, then it will scale efficiently. And so even if you wanted to say that both infrastructure and user costs scale linearly, the point is that like user costs might scale linearly this much, and then infrastructure cost scales linearly. Like it's much more graceful. And so the problem, or the thing you have to remember, is over a very long period of time, and this is what we tell people when we're doing the sale, is like time to market almost certainly going to be faster on Experience Cloud using some of their tooling, just buying the users and going out. But then over, let's call it a 20-25 year ownership period, and how that community scales and what that user count's going to end up being, and then you like compare that to like what the infrastructure usage would be 20 to 25 years down the road, you're like, oh my gosh, like
I wouldn't say 20, I would say like that, like 5 years we're talking about here.
Yeah, 5-10 years.
But I would say, I would argue though, as well, when you look at that scaling, like at least the way you described it, it's not even like when you say like not the scaling, when you look at the go-to-market piece, and this is the thing that I feel like trips up a lot of people, because they're like, well, obviously Salesforce is quicker to market because you just use all the tools, right? And you build it out of Lightning, right? Yeah. And you look at that as part of your cost, because like that's less development, it's more point and click, it's like I'm out. And I'm like, yes, assuming that you want your portal to look like your Salesforce org, then absolutely it's the fastest. The second
don't steal all my thunder on design considerations.
But that's what I'm saying. It's like the second you start building really a custom app, that quickness to market is, I would argue, very for a team that's good in both Experience Cloud and Heroku, I feel that the speed to market is marginal at best. I mean, you're measuring like maybe weeks over the course of a 6-month endeavor. And by weeks, I mean like two weeks, maybe 3 weeks tops as a delta. And at that point, it's like, I don't think that's really where you're gonna like where the key decision should be.
It shouldn't be the key
But
decision.
it's often the focus. It's often the focus up front when they're like originally looking to make this purchase. And I think that's the mistake. It's like I think really where you're looking at this is both tools are very flexible. It's what's going to scale with you at what cost. Like really, that's where you want to focus, because you can build beautiful custom pixel perfect UI using lightning out components, full JavaScript. You don't even need to use the lightning system. You can just do straight up HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, whatever you want on Salesforce and host it. It works
You're
great.
stealing all my design consideration points, Mike.
But I mean, this all comes down to the cost.
But you are right. When I say faster to market, I think it is important to emphasize that when we're talking about scale faster to market, we're talking about something that's measured in a handful of weeks. Because we know enough, and I know enough that in my mind, I'm already operating at that scale. But for somebody looking at making a purchasing decision, they might hear faster time to market and think months or longer, and it's really not that big of a difference. The other thing, because there were a few pieces I wanted to call out from the cost analysis and like where user costs, because you talked about logins per month, and logins per month, at least as far as I know, this was something that came in shortly after Salesforce's initial Heroku acquisition, I believe. And I think part of that was because that like Experience Cloud pricing, like with named users, wasn't always.
No, it was around before communities were even a thing. It was a Portals product they did.
Was it a Portals product? Yeah. Okay.
I've been around a long time.
I was going to say, he has been around longer than me. Like, so when you see the salt and pepper in his hair, like, it's the truth. That's why I defer to him. But I wanted to, I love you, buddy. What I wanted to touch on here, because there's still, even with that named users per month, giving you some grace and flexibility, there's still some situations that are going to catch you. Like, it's not going to matter number of logins per month versus named users. Now, normally I use an example from the e-commerce space, like Black Friday. Obviously, there are commerce products for Salesforce, so I'm going to set that one aside. But I would like to talk somewhat anonymously about a use case that we've had personal experience with. We've worked with companies that like work in like the diet and nutrition space. And so they have an annual cadence on their user participation. You guys might be surprised to find out that they get most of their customer orders and subscriptions at the beginning of the new year. Hello, New Year's resolutions to be healthier. So in an Experience Cloud type format where maybe they're using landing pages and like not quite an e-commerce platform, but just an engagement platform to engage with people interested in these diet and nutritional programs, like January is going to be their biggest month. That's when that happens. And so even if you're only paying for like number of logins per month and you're like, most of the year nobody's logging in, but then in January everybody logs in, your monthly logins per month has to be scaled to January, period. That it is what it is. There is no cost scales up for a month and then it scales down. That's not how the Salesforce contract works. So you also need to think about like those things, because if you have annual cadences, not monthly cadences, but annual cadences with your customers, in particular months are going to hit you harder, your user cost is going to scale there. Now with Heroku and with your infrastructure scaling, like you even have the ability to temporarily scale up and pay for more and then scale back down. So there's more control and flexibility at that infrastructure level than there is necessarily at the user level. And that's another key thing on the cost that I wanted to make sure we touched on. And it's something you should be thinking about as you're making this decision. And again, thinking about, you're right, I was a little long horizon there, but like 5 or 10 years, if you're building something to last, as that user base grows, these are the kinds of thoughts that, like, if you didn't think about it up front, the price could come back to surprise you.
Well, I mean, they can even come back within like the first year. Like it could really, and we've seen that happen before with some horror stories where like the community just completely blows up in popularity, where you're like, oh, this is a good problem to have. But then not only are they getting phone calls from their AEs to like sign up for more licenses, but they're already hitting performance limits as well. Because often the more users you have hitting your system, the more API hits, it all kind of ties in. And again, so that's where like, and we're talking about a lot of these differences to highlight the advantages of Heroku from the the scalability of cost and the scalability of design considerations and performance. And I don't want to skip too far ahead, but there are, like, just to circle back and not completely poo-poo on Experience Cloud, because there are really good use cases and some specific numbers that I've seen, and Justin, I think you can evaluate, like you could corroborate, is that if your community accesses your portal less than daily and you have a less than 10,000 member community, like, and that's your total addressable audience that you're looking at, not like, hey, 10,000, then we're going to grow to 100, or we're going to grow up here. Like, if you're in the range where it's like they're not hitting this daily, they're hitting it like once a week, and you have less than 10,000, Experience Cloud should be something you consider at the start.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're north of 10,000 and or people are hitting this daily, hourly, minute by minute, whatever they're polling this stuff, you should really just not even look at Experience Cloud at all. You should be looking at Heroku. And I know those are very broad strokes, and Justin, don't persecute me for it, because there's a lot of like gray area in the middle, and there's a lot of overlap. We've seen successful community deployments with 50,000 users that access weekly, but it's under these very specific narrow constraints. And Experience Cloud made more sense because it was quicker to market. There was less design considerations, other stuff we're going to talk about. But the high level stuff is that if you got north than 10,000 users that are going to be actively using your product, communities is probably not your starting point. Definitely talk to a consultant and do the evaluation. But just to put some hard numbers on it, you're probably want to go and look at a Heroku build and integrate that with Salesforce Connect and Heroku Connect.
Yeah. And you made a good call out there that I think it will make sense for us to stay here. That way Peyton can clip it and put it at the beginning of this. Salesforce does a great job talking up the strengths of the Experience Cloud platform, and they very well understood it. So I think us focusing on some of the positives on the Heroku are just to make sure that people understand that, like, it's a balancing act. You want to look at both of these. So definitely not to punch down on Experience Cloud, because there is a lot of power there. And especially when we talk about this next technology piece, like, there's less flexibility, but there's a lot of streamlining. And I think that's where we want to transition to next.
Yeah, and I think we'll say too, it's like there's also, depending on your particular use case, it's often not even just a either or, it's sometimes an and, where you might have 100 super users or 100 active users on your Experience Cloud, using all the benefits that Force.com and Salesforce brings to you, including the access control logic and everything else, roles, permissions, sharing rules, all the goodies that you get with Salesforce out of the box. But then the larger community is active, a different user type that has like 100,000 people. They're on a custom experience in Heroku. And often you'll see both of those. And again, it's like Experience.
Well, we've implemented those side by side, like wide-reaching communities on Heroku that then have like special logins to like a privileged community that's actually an Experience Cloud community, and we do that handoff basically like from one subdomain to the next. And this is not an uncommon design paradigm.
Yeah, and I think to your point too, it's like, again, like, we're probably going to bias a lot of this information talking about Heroku here, mainly because it's less well understood, since Heroku can do we've talked about AI, we've talked about data agility.
You said AI this time, it wasn't me.
Yeah, we talked about data piping, agility, APIs, integration. Like, Heroku does a lot of stuff, and so communities is only one aspect. And so it's not as easy, it's not as cookie cutter or well understood from a sales play as the community is, because you got a pre-built product. So Salesforce does a great job looking at Experience Cloud. Highly recommend you guys look at the information both on Trailhead and as well the marketing information on Salesforce.com. They provide a lot of great overviews for it. But I think that covers the cost point. So let's talk about buy versus
technology.
Build.
Buy versus build.
Yeah.
So Experience Cloud, we definitely look at as the buy approach. And there's a couple reasons for this mentality. So first off, I want to be clear. We're not saying that like you buy Experience Cloud and you automatically have a community. That, like, there are templates, there are starting points, but you are going to have to configure and set up your community. And to that point, like Mike, we've supported customers that have had like communities that had like full-on Angular implementations inside of them, like very custom, very robust. So don't think of it as like, oh, I just buy it and the problem's solved. But it is as close to that end of the spectrum as you're basically going to get. The reason I say that is Experience Cloud comes with their beautiful WYSIWYG design interface. For those of you who don't know or recognize without seeing it, WYSIWYG, it's what you see is what you get. So that idea of I'm dragging and dropping components on a page, like the page layout, page builder for backend Salesforce, that kind of thing. I'm dragging and dropping the elements I want, and I'm looking at the page I'm building as I build it, and that's the experience that my users are going to see. It's a very much loved and often sought after feature for community stand-ups, for external facing experiences. Theirs is very robust. It's done very well. The other thing that's nice about it is the skill set to use the community builder is a Salesforce admin or developer style resource. So if you're already a Salesforce customer, if you already have in-house Salesforce IT, you've got a couple developers, you got a Salesforce admin, and you're like, I need to get an external experience out. I do not want to staff additional engineers or anything else. Experience Cloud, you buy it and it basically takes you 80% of the way there, and the talent you already have can get that done. Now, on the other end of the spectrum though, that could also be a problem. If you have an extremely busy internal Salesforce IT branch that's doing stuff for your sales team, for your marketing team, for other teams, by putting your community on Experience Cloud and putting this in their work stream, you might be dealing with bandwidth issues, bottlenecking in terms of like, when are people rolling out these external facing updates you want? So it is an advantage. It can also be a drawback. You have to look at your internal staffing and think about that. But the idea, and this is why we call it the buy approach, is if you've got people to operate your Salesforce, buying Experience Cloud basically gets you as close to a finished community product as you're going to get.
Yeah. And it's interesting you bring that up, because when I think about it, when you're looking at like, well, hey, Salesforce IT, I'm going to put this over here, but that's another thing for them to deal with. And it's interesting you bring it up like from a resource allocation standpoint. Like if you have a Salesforce partner like RadialSpark, please give us a call. I'll happy to give you a quote and support you guys. But like in all seriousness, like even if you're looking at this, it is not something people often think about, because Salesforce resources, even though Salesforce has grown tremendously over the last decade and is pretty ubiquitous throughout a lot of industries as a CRM, Salesforce developer resources are hard to find and are rare. And so when Justin brings up like the IT bandwidth issues and do I want to put this on Salesforce, although normally I would say, hey, if it's the best place for it, put it there rather than go build it somewhere else. But this might be something logistically that you have to think about. And the reason I bring it up is because we've seen that before within our own customers, where they're not able to manage and whatnot. And they'll either come to a third party like us and say, hey, we need help. My guys don't have time to deal with this particular thing, or the full expertise to take full advantage of the community tools. One thing I'd like to bring to, like you did bring up briefly beyond the WYSIWYG and the buy approach, is the app exchange. As our Salesforce customers should know and are familiar with what the app exchange brings to the table. The really cool thing when you're building on Experience Cloud and you're building communities there is that the app exchange gives you fully baked, pre-built applications and add-ons that you can point and click your way and incorporate and provision users for into your community with the UI, depending on the app that you choose. But it's like pretty much it's a full applet that you're able to deploy out of the gate. Business people understand them. It's easy to install, basic admin skill set, like ton of advantages. And so when you look at the build versus buy, when you're evaluating, hey, I want to build my Experience Cloud and I want to be able to do these 5 features, these 5 things I need to have my community do. 3 of them might be just purchases away on the app exchange, like fully fleshed out, some minor configuration over the course of a couple of weeks, and you plug it into your Experience Cloud and you're good to go. There is a Heroku related.
I would say it's almost equivalent, not quite.
I didn't want to say
that was literally where the gears were turning in my head.
It's not equivalent. It's not equivalent, because the thing is, when you look at the app exchange, you're looking at think of like going to the supermarket and you're like, I'm just going to pick up a frozen dinner, and then I'm just going to throw it in the, throw it on the stove, and boom, it's done, right? Like it's that quick. Like you're up and running.
You can reuse the Lightning Web components, the
Yeah.
S objects. You like everything that you get in the back of your Salesforce org, like your Sales Cloud, your Service Cloud, everything that the managed package gives you there typically can be made accessible to your community in the exact same format, which is kind of unprecedented. Like third-party add-ons for back office also being available to like front office or external facing experiences. And the Heroku almost equivalent, which we'll get into, it'll be able to do that for data. It won't be able to do that for the Lightning components in the UI.
Yeah, and the analogy I was going to bring, and I'll let you go into the technical details, is that the Heroku version of this, it's called its Elements Marketplace, and Justin will go into exactly like what it brings to the table. But as opposed to going to the supermarket and picking up all the raw ingredients and doing everything yourself, it's like, hey, there's some diced onions, there's some prepackaged stuff that I'm going to build this recipe that is like, it's already somewhat prepared, but it's not as easy as throwing this in a microwave or throwing it on the stove and being done. You have to put the pieces together. And
that's took this in a slightly different direction than I thought you were going to take it, actually, because to that point, yes, there's the Elements Marketplace, which I'm going to talk about, but I was even actually thinking more, if you're building your experience, like your community on Heroku, and let's say you are looking at business feature sets, so you're like, oh, I need this for my experience, and I need this for my back office, and I buy an App Exchange product. So the App Exchange product will be fully available typically in both Sales Service Cloud as well as any Experience Cloud communities. If you're building your community on Heroku, you buy that App Exchange product, all of the S objects in that product can still be connected through Heroku Connect into your Heroku experience, but the Lightning components, the UI, the customizations they built native to the Salesforce platform, those don't connect over. So that's why it's like a partial match. But as the other thing that you called out, the Elements Marketplace is Heroku's counterpoint to Salesforce's App Exchange, but as they call it, like Salesforce's App Exchange is an app exchange. Heroku's Elements Marketplace is selling either services or infrastructure resources to add on to your application to deliver something. So as an example, and I'm just going to use this one because this is top of mind for me, anybody who has heard of like Financial Force or Certinia, setting that up on Salesforce, that's a managed package that gets installed onto the Force.com platform. And it is a accounting PSA, like it's basically a full-on ERP system. Very impressive. It is an app. On the Heroku Elements Marketplace, like the kinds of things you would buy there would be memory storage or database, or on the higher end, like a service, it might be Mailgun, SendGrid, something that's like, oh, this is my email service, this is how I'm going to make my app send emails. And so you can kind of see like the idea of, oh, SendGrid to send emails versus a fully baked ERP. These are not the same things being sold in these marketplaces. Yeah, and that's a really good call out, Mike.
Well, and that's what I was saying. It's like when you look at like from a recipe standpoint, it's like I'm buying diced onions instead of a raw onion and doing it all myself. It's like I'm buying some of the pre-baked ingredients, but really like
you still have to do some cooking.
Yeah. Like I'm gonna do a lot of cooking, more than just toss it in a microwave, which is where the App Exchange kind of is. Like you buy Financial Force, you configure it. You set up your permissions and you get, well, Financial Force is probably a bad example for that, but for other less complicated and thorough apps, it's like plug and play, right? And you're off to the races. But the good point that you did bring out, which I like wasn't thinking about again, I was talking more about the difference between the buy and the build approach, is that even if you buy these things on the App Exchange, as Justin mentioned, you can expose the data to your Heroku portal. So again, this kind of comes down to, it's not always an either or, it's often sometimes
there is a lot of nuance.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance, but again, for like the very specific, like, hey, it needs to be an either or, I'm not going to build this twice, or I don't have a very complicated use case, I want to use the App Exchange, I want pre-built apps, I'm going to plug in a bunch of pre-baked things and make my meal that way, Experience Cloud's the way to go. If you're like, hey, I want to customize the heck out of this. I want to do different integrations. I want to incorporate all this other stuff. And I also might want to buy some stuff from the App Exchange too and synchronize that data over here. Heroku's your way. Like you're the executive chef. No one tells you how to do anything. Like you're just going to make it all yourself.
It's your kitchen, you're in charge.
Exactly. And I think that's where, like, to wrap up the buy versus build, unless I miss anything, like that's really
there were a few things I wanted to touch on, elaborate on the build for Heroku. And before we did, I had one final sentence I wanted to say on the buy approach, because we were talking about the IT bandwidth before we went down this rabbit hole. And I just wanted to say one thing to explain why I think IT bandwidth is important, specifically when you're talking about a community. So when you're juggling resource allocation for like your Salesforce team, the things getting done, it's kind of understood that you can like, oh, I need something for an internal team. If it takes longer than expected, like they'll deal with it. But if you have external facing communities and you're trying to get content updates out, you're trying to get things done, timeliness matters more externally facing than it does internally. That's just, you know, one of the truths of business. And so if you've got an already stretched thin Salesforce team, this is why the bandwidth thing matters, is because if you're trying to have a timely and prompt experience that's like putting out new content the day that it matters and your team's already bogged down, they will under deliver on that front and you're not going to be getting the value you expected. Having different resources, different team. So that's where I wanted to end on, just that the buy piece with the Experience Cloud. To touch on the reason why we call Heroku build, and we've done a lot of comparisons. I just don't feel like we laid the foundation. We call Heroku the build approach because Heroku, in its simplest terms, is a Salesforce-owned platform as a service built on top of AWS infrastructure as a service, period, end of sentence. So anything that you would ever consider doing on AWS where you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to spin up my own private network and I'm going to do this, that, and the other, like Heroku does that. Heroku lets you do that. Heroku private spaces or AWS VPCs, all of this. So when you're playing in the Heroku space, you get all that control over your different infrastructure aspects. You have some of it automated for you because it is a platform and not infrastructure as a service. So you don't necessarily need an infrastructure engineer or a network engineer, but you're controlling your IP whitelisting. You're controlling all of these different aspects of what can talk to what else, where. And the resources you're going to use to do that are going to be more traditional web developers. So that's why we look at that as the build approach. From there, I think we can move on to the design considerations. And this one, I think we're going to touch on pretty quickly. So Experience Cloud, like especially the WYSIWYG editor, everything else, like this is designed to reuse Lightning components that you've developed for internal use, so on and so forth. And anybody who's familiar with the LWC framework knows you can highly customize the styling and really create a bespoke experience. But like by default, all the natural stylings for components that you put together for things that you're like, if you're not paying for a bunch of CSS work and other things like that, you're going to be steering towards the vanilla Salesforce look and feel. So if you want to maximize the advantage of like the couple of weeks of time to market and things like that, from a design point, when you're looking at Experience Cloud, you are saying, I'm playing to the strengths of the framework. I'm using the out-of-the-box stylings. I'm incorporating that so I move fast. If you're looking to do something very complicated with your styling, like as I mentioned, you can bring Angular into Experience Cloud community. You can bring like Bootstrap and all these other frameworks. But at that point, now you're starting to do very heavy custom development and tying that into Salesforce's, the rest of their model for application logic and automation. And you can end up putting more effort into customizing an Experience Cloud community than just building it exactly the way you want it out of the box on Heroku. And because Heroku is sort of like that AWS family style of thinking, they don't care what it looks like. They don't put any opinions in terms of code frameworks, what you're doing. So you pick the language, you pick the front end and the back end frameworks, you pick the styling frameworks, and you get something that is designed exactly the way you want it. And if you want Salesforce styling, or if you want to incorporate some of your Lightning components into your experience on Heroku, there is Lightning Out framework, which lets you have that styling. It lets you embed actual Lightning components in your experience and authenticate them as like either a Salesforce user or a community user if you have those from other communities. So there is some closeness and some integration there while having more free-form design control over what your experience is going to be. That is, I think in a nutshell, probably really the key of it on design considerations. I don't know that we need to boil the ocean here. Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Pretty straightforward.
All right. Then let's talk about performance. And I know we said multi-tenant versus single tenant, but what this really boils down to is governor limits versus no governor limits. Because if you're building a community on Experience Cloud, and let's say, you know, beyond just people logging in and pointing, clicking through an experience, if you're doing file uploads, if you're doing anything through API interactions, things like that, every API endpoint facilitating Experience Cloud interactions is a Force.com API endpoint and will count against your inbound API limits, which is one of my favorite ones to cite. So if you've got complex or like robust functionality that you want to deliver through your community that's going to require APIs, going to require other customizations there, you need to think about, okay, what about my 10-second CPU timeout, my this, that, and the other, because all of those rules also apply to your experience.
What if my user needs to query 1 million records at the same time and show it into
all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And this is because Experience Cloud lives in your Salesforce, in Salesforce's larger multi-tenant infrastructure, and so you have to play by the rules of the sandbox and share with the other kids. Heroku, when you buy your Heroku infrastructure, that is yours. And they basically said, use it and abuse it as you want. If you go far enough over the limits, we will reach out to you to talk about increasing your contract, but it's not being shared with anyone.
Yeah,
so
there's no
whatever you want.
There's no hard cap. Like, and the only caps that you do have are contractually based. So it's like,
well, and those caps aren't even hard enforced. If you go over contract, they'll let you, and then they'll contact you.
There's no hard cap. Yeah, it's only a soft cap, and it's only contractual. Like you can turn it to 11, and it'll go to 11. Like you can keep cranking up your dyno sizes and whatnot, like ad infinitum. Like, and that's the thing. It's like, so depending, and this kind of comes back to what we were talking about, cost and some other stuff and design considerations that we brought up earlier on when we were having that cost discussion. Is it depends on the type of app you're using, and it's like, do I have 10,000 users? Are they accessing it a lot? Are they accessing every minute? Are they pulling in all this data? Like, what are they doing with this thing that you're using? And this is where you might be like, hey, multi-tenant isn't going to cut it for what I need it to do. I need performance. I need speed. I need power. And that's where Heroku comes in. And I think I think it's pretty straightforward there. It's like, if you need all the power and you don't want to, like, you want to take all the electricity from the building, then you buy the building and it's yours. And that's what Heroku is. If you're like, hey, I have this apartment, I'm going to tie into my neighbor's wall socket and start like, Salesforce ain't going to let you do that.
Yeah, Salesforce is going to keep an eye on that. So no limits, and this goes back to that cost analysis too, right? Because since you're not sharing with anybody else, you get to design how your infrastructure is used, so you can be extremely efficient to make it scale very gracefully, and you optimize it for your uses. Whereas Salesforce is built to work for, I mean, they have the largest market share for a reason. It's built to work for everyone, not for you specifically.
So the last one I think I can cover really quick, and then I want to go on to the special considerations and talk about the hybrid CRM apps, because this is my favorite thing to work on. These projects are awesome. But go-to-market strategy, this kind of comes down to this. So if you're using Experience Cloud and you're like, hey, my entire IT infrastructure and everything else that I do is my world revolves around Salesforce, and this is going to be my go-to-market strategy. And when I potentially sell this company, or we get acquired, or however that's going to work, you don't have any concerns that anyone's going to be like, oh, I want to move this over to Microsoft or whatever else. Like, Salesforce is your bay. This is what it's going to be. Experience Cloud is a great solution. However, if you're like, hey, my internal IT guys, they use a lot of AWS. Like, they do a lot of Python development. They do a lot of Node development. I want to make sure that we're able to build and reuse some of those apps. And Salesforce might be a component of that, but it isn't the center star piece of everything we're doing. Or when I build this experience and I build this application and I want to sell my company, I don't want them to be, oh, you also have to buy my Salesforce contract. I want this to be separable, like from the core business, from my core CRM. Then you're looking at Heroku. And it's weird to talk about this, but we've had it come up where we've built beautiful experiences on Experience Cloud, or formerly portals, Salesforce, Force.com portals and sites. And we built these amazing experiences there. And some of the customers had trouble, like, you're like, well, this buyer doesn't want it. They don't want to have the Salesforce. They had a bad experience, which again, like, pick any, people have bad experience with Microsoft, but for whatever reason, it's like, we got the questions like, hey, can you move this over to C#? And I'm like, yeah, but you would have to rebuild the whole thing from scratch, because when you build applications on Force.com, on Salesforce, it is opinionated, extremely opinionated on how things are built, how you structure your queries,
proprietary language and ORM.
Yeah, exactly. All of those things that you can't just lift and shift, where if you build on Heroku, you're using open source frameworks, you're using Python, you're using JavaScript. You can use C#, although I don't know why, but or Java or anything else. So you're like, hey, I want to run this somewhere else. You're like, go for it. You bought it, it's yours. Like, you can put it on your home computer. Like, doesn't matter to me. Set up a home server, bring it on-prem, and that's the flexibility of the Heroku brings. So when you're looking at that go-to-market strategy, and I would also say that we probably update this and say your exit strategy,
yes,
consider those points. And I think after that, that pretty much covers what you're looking at there.
Well, and I was going to say, because there was a reason why I specifically used the word divest in the article, because the idea being, maybe you're not getting bought out and you lose a potential exit or purchase because the buyer had a bad experience with Salesforce previously. But we've talked about this at RadialSpark, our own business model, incubating good ideas, then building products, potentially communities around them. And so if we do that and then we spin them off into their own company, product company gets purchased, we don't want to have a Salesforce project to separate product communities and product services from our core Salesforce, because we're not going to give up our CRM. We're going to keep doing our RadialSpark thing and going that route. And so that's where just having that little bit of insulation between it, if it's something that you're like, I'm building this up to sell it, whether it's part of your whole business or it's a portion that you're doing with that in mind, just knowing that little bit of black boxing you get from Heroku makes it easier to say, this is now yours, you're going to point it to your Salesforce, and now the pivot is done. I don't have to have a Salesforce project to break out data and automation and transfer some of it over to you, but keep my other processes for me. It's not a nightmare like that.
So I think we've talked a lot about how Experience Cloud shapes up with Heroku. And I know we've had definitely a bias. That bias is going to continue to show as we go into some of these other options. But we want to talk about some very specific special considerations. And the first one, and Justin, if you don't mind me walking through it.
I know it's your favorite. It's yours.
Yeah. So it's the hybrid CRM apps on Heroku. And what the heck does this mean? So the thing is, and this kind of, we talked about design considerations, we talked about build versus buy, and Justin brought up the point. It's like, hey, I can buy this on the App Exchange, but I can export all this data over to Heroku and synchronize it seamlessly using Heroku Connect and or Salesforce Connect. And we've talked a lot about that. And if you guys want a refresher, we've done some stuff with our, you can review to our previous episode on the data agility layer, where we go into detail of what these two are. It's explained in this article too, so you can get a little refresher here. I'm not going to go over it, and I'm not letting Justin go over it either, again. But the short version is that because we're able to tightly couple our custom experience, our custom application on Heroku with the data and metadata that is derived from Salesforce, it allows us to do a lot of creative things. And when we say hybrid CRM, the thing is that what Heroku allows us to do is build these bespoke web experiences for our customers while not having to do anything for our internal Salesforce users. And what I mean by anything is that we get access control, object control, data control, and metadata control with the entire point and click interface that Salesforce brings to the table with their Force.com and Salesforce platform. Like, they have it. They've already built it. Like, I don't need to, if I want to add a new data type to an object or a table, and I want that to show up in my community, I configure that in Salesforce. I set it up. I build reports off of it. I build dashboards off of it using the Salesforce tools that come out of the box with every purchase. I don't need to rebuild that when I'm building my custom app. And that's the really cool thing with Heroku, is that you just focus on the build that your customers are gonna see, like that they're gonna care about, or your partners are gonna care about. You're gonna focus on those features. You're not gonna have to build a bunch of back office admin features. And even the ones that you do want to build out in that automation, that's all done on your Salesforce CRM. It's all done using point and click admin tools. And if you need to build some custom ones, so you can, obviously, but that is the advantage. That's where this hybrid application, where these two things are tightly coupled and they come together. And so oftentimes a big misstep we see a lot of people when they're evaluating these two tools, even though we've gone through this, it's like, well, I want more of a buy approach rather than a build approach. You have to understand that half the work is already done. Because when you build a custom app or custom community and you're like, I'm going to build this on AWS and I'm going to set this all up myself, I'm going to integrate it with my core infrastructure, you're doing the whole thing by yourself, ground up, both the back end administration views and the front end for your customers and the front end for your admin.
For your admins.
Yeah, like you have to do it all, like, and you have to build the whole thing. And I'll be fair, like there's some components and things and frameworks that you can use to make that easier, but you're still doing it all yourself, where it's like, yeah, that whole back half, that's done. It's
everything
done.
up to deploying data to the application is basically point and click.
It's exactly. And that's the cool thing. And that's what makes the leap to the build side, when you're looking at these communities, not as scary as a lot of people think. They think they're going to have to do the whole thing front to back. It's all on Heroku. I don't understand. I don't understand how this works. I don't understand to build it. It's too much. It's too scary. And they have to understand that if you develop these tightly coupled with your CRM, it dramatically simplifies your initial release, because you don't need any of that back office custom development. And on top of that, the administration of your app post-release, when you want to add or modify new features, manage your users, manage basic CRM stuff, like cases coming in, people are like asking things or chatting with you on your web portal, which is a lot of what these communities are. Like you're communicating with your partners, with your customers, with your audience. All that data is already synchronized with your CRM. So it all, like someone creates a task, a case, or whatever, all the automation that would flow off of that is already built in your CRM, or already can be built in your CRM. It's all Salesforce automation. All the reports, all the dashboard, it's already hooked together. So you're not like, oh, now I have to integrate it and I have to tie this up. It's literally the same objects, same fields, same record types, all of it. And so when we do these hybrid applications and we deploy these for customers, the long-term maintenance also isn't as scary, because the database is already handled by Salesforce. The reports, the dashboards, the analytics are all done on Salesforce. And so that takes off a massive load when you're looking at building this stuff. So
there is one part of this that you hadn't touched on that I would like to chime in on, which is the other end of the spectrum. So just like how with Experience Cloud, you're using the same Salesforce database, so you've got that data connectivity, and I think you touched on that really well. If you look at it from the other perspective, because Experience Cloud communities and like Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, it's all the same database on your Force.com platform. You've got your security and sharing rules, but it is a single database. You have to store all of your community data in Force.com on Salesforce. With the hybrid CRM approach, Heroku Connect and Salesforce Connect give you all of those same advantages of sharing the data with your CRM database, but you don't have to, because when you have data coming in from your partners or customers, it could be large volume data, and not all of it could be CRM valuable. So you do have the ability as part of your application design to build with your hybrid CRM apps that you're collecting non-CRM data through those apps. You are saving it on Heroku, but you're not using Heroku Connect or Salesforce Connect to send it to Salesforce. And some of you are asking, why would I do that? To which I would respond, how many of my listeners have bought a data storage extension from Salesforce? Like, data storage on Salesforce is not free, and it does not always scale gracefully. And so if you're like, I already have a massive amount of data in Salesforce and I do not need this in Salesforce and I don't want to pay for it to be in Salesforce, hybrid CRM approaches give you the option to pick and choose what you send to your CRM in order to do this. And this is a bit of a callback to our data agility layer and data lifecycle management, that idea of archiving data off of the Salesforce platform, keeping it accessible as an external object, because that's the only way, by aging out data that's no longer relevant, that's how you prevent from buying more and more data storage extensions. If you're not thinking about it that way, a data storage extension is a band-aid. It solves the problem today, but you're going to continue to generate more data and it will become a problem again tomorrow. So hybrid CRM apps help you design external facing experiences, which are prone to generating a lot of data, in a way where you feed the valuable data into your CRM, you pay for it to be there when it matters, but then the stuff that might be valuable to see or have, but you don't need in your CRM, you can still collect it, retain it, but you can do so much more cost effectively. And so I wanted to touch on that other side of the spectrum briefly.
Yeah, and I think that allows us to move on, because what you just brought up with how and where you synchronize the data kind of tails nicely into
the next special consideration, which is my favorite consideration.
And I think this one, with the experience with multiple Salesforce orgs, like we anonymized customer use case that I believe you'll want to use, but this is a great consideration to think about, because if you're a customer who has more than one Salesforce org, because through acquisition or partnership with another firm or however that works, and you need to keep the data segregated, but all of your customers don't care, like, I want to buy from you guys and that's all I care about, and you want to have like a unified customer experience, but you need to keep the rules in the CRM like really segregated. That's very difficult to do with just Experience Cloud without having multiple Experience Clouds. But with Heroku,
and you're paying for duplicate data most likely, right? Like the short of it, the problem
not even
statement
that. I would say it's not even that. It's that you have to either you have to modify one or both business processes to fit your use case, which either duplicates data or modifies everything entirely.
100%, because the problem statement behind this special consideration is this. All of your data for your community has to live in the force.com that the community is hosted in. So like Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, and Experience Cloud data are all in the same database. So if you have two Salesforce orgs, you buy one Experience Cloud, it's in one of those orgs, and it will only be able to surface the data that's in that org. There are a whole bunch of, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of why it's responsible and intelligent to maintain multiple Salesforce orgs. And there are many, many good reasons, either through M&A, or if you've got vastly different business departments with different business processes.
60% of Salesforce customers have more than one org. So it's
like 2 out of every 3 Salesforce customers is running a multi-org setup. And there's good reasons to do so. So with that in mind, if you're like, okay, my customers want a single experience, because to use a word that Salesforce likes to use a lot, customer 360, what that means is if you have, let's say, 2 Salesforce orgs, you want one experience that's delivering customer 360, the org that doesn't have to have Experience Cloud, any data that you want surfaced through your experience has to be sent to the org that has the experience. There are, Mike, as you said, a couple considerations with that. The one I called out, which is the most fundamental, is you're now paying for storing a copy of the data in its original org and a copy of the data in the org hosting the Experience Cloud, so it's visible. But like when we're talking about accounts, contacts, opportunities, whatever, if you want both orgs' data to live side by side in the community, that means you're saving it into the same tables. Accounts from org 1 are getting saved into accounts from org 2 where the Experience Cloud is. This now means that Apex triggers, process builders, workflow rules, everything that
Yeah,
you
that's what I
have
was
that's
saying.
set to fire. Yeah, that's where you were going. Everything you have that's set to fire on those objects will now start firing on those objects being synced from the other org,
Or
unless you start building branching logic and flagging it. And this is a brittle anti-pattern, which means because now everything in your org for any data shared through that Experience Cloud now has to take this branching into account and be like, wait, this isn't our data, it's the other org's data. We're just here to show it. We should not be messing with it. We don't want to send these emails out. We don't want to do brand damage with miscommunication. It becomes a nitpick. And it's basically the same design concern that we've seen with people that try to mash two Salesforce orgs together like haphazardly, is combining the business processes, combining the data, each company's data firing the other company's business processes, and it does a lot of brand damage to that organization externally because it's chaotic and it's erroneous communications. Data is getting mangled by automation that shouldn't be running on it. All of those concerns come into play here.
And I think
so then you're, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, and I think the short version, because I know we're running a little short on time here, so we don't go too long. But the short version is that you don't want to do that, and Heroku doesn't force you to do that because you have a Heroku Postgres database. You're able to leverage that Postgres database to synthesize that data seamlessly, to expose that into a unified community experience without manipulating
any of your actual CRM data.
Yeah, from the two source systems or the three source systems or however many sources.
And that's where Heroku Connect comes into play. And it's actually this architecture is very similar to the multi-org data sharing architecture that we've talked about previously, where you're syncing the data, the CRM data from both orgs into one database, and then you're using that database to drive your experience. So this sidesteps all the technical heartache that Mike called out and that I called out. Two, if you have business requirements, like let's say these Salesforce orgs are owned by separate business units and each unit does business with the other unit's competitors, like just to maximize market share. So those units probably have like a bit of a firewall between them to say, like, we don't disclose the competitor's secret sauce across this boundary. Otherwise we lose the trust, we lose the market share, et cetera. That kind of thing prevents you from sharing the data directly between the Salesforce orgs. But by saying, hey, we're going to share everything to this neutral ground in Heroku, and then the customer can see everything for both business units, even the secret sauce stuff that each individual team is not allowed to see from the other team. They can see all that. They can interact. They get their customer 360, and then any changes made to the data syncs back to the respective org. You've maintained that back-end isolation to respect your business relationships while still delivering on a true 360. And this is one of the only ways to do it in the ecosystem right now.
Yep. So I think that we're going to blitz through this last piece because we've talked a lot about leveraging.
Well, and this is just a callback to my last point on the hybrid CRM, leveraging non-Salesforce systems. Because at the end of the day, this would be that data you don't necessarily want to Heroku Connect all the way in. You're like, I don't necessarily need this particular piece of fulfillment data or this particular piece of accounting data. I want to know that the invoice was paid, and that's all I care about.
Yeah, and I think
so. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was saying it's not that Experience Cloud can't, like, because you could still use your OData 4 API. You can use Salesforce Connect to go straight to Experience Cloud. That is a valid option. So if you want to virtualize that data and expose it for other solutions for other systems that support OData 4 connectors, you can do that in Experience Cloud. But as we've shown before and we've talked about with a lot of the patterns, we've talked about using Heroku as a central data hub, and is also
for connectivity, all of that.
And all the other considerations just outlined. It's like, I don't want all this. I just want to know when the invoice is. I don't need every single line item. I just want the summary data. I don't need all the credit card transaction history, all that kind of stuff. Heroku then, like, when you have all that data centralized from non-Salesforce systems in Heroku already, which might be a project you've already embarked upon by looking at one of our previous videos and articles, it just makes sense to build a portal on top of that if you're going to leverage that data rather than having to jump through hoops, dodge around Salesforce limits, and setting up an Experience Cloud. You should evaluate doing it on Heroku first. And
Well,
so,
and
yeah,
to be able to expose that data, because in this case, when we're talking about communities, right, being able to expose that data to your customer, because the
yeah,
interesting thing is
or
this,
partner.
when we talk about like invoicing, right, when your customer logs into the portal, they probably want to see everything about the invoice. They might even be facilitating the payment of the invoice through the portal, depending on what you've built in your community. So they care about the line items. They care about every little detail on that invoice, and you need to show that to your customer. But if your CRM teams don't, you can just take the header and send it back and say, hey, they paid it, it's done.
Yeah.
So you're showing everything to your users, but only showing your CRM teams what they actually care about for their job and their next steps.
So I think this is a good place to wrap here, because I know, guys, we
Yeah.
kept you for over an hour, and Peyton will be chopping this up into chapters so that it's digestible for you guys, and we'll be releasing those videos as well as having the chapter highlights when this live stream publishes. But I think, again, there's a lot to cover here, and I think the takeaway is, like, when you guys are looking at where to build your experience for your particular audience, whether that's your partners, your customers, whomever it may be, there's a lot of thought that goes into whether it's Heroku or whether you build it on Force.com native. And I think it definitely, you'll want to bring in a partner to help you guys do that evaluation. We offer free health checks, and we offer free analysis for this type of stuff if you guys are looking to do this type of evaluation. Or from a Salesforce perspective, if you're an AE that it's like, I have a customer that has this use case, I don't know which one to pitch, like, we definitely can help you guys navigate those waters. But at the end of the day, if you follow some of the guidelines that we have here, I hope that you guys have some takeaways of, like, hey, here's about where this is a no-brainer Experience Cloud play. This is where I should really be thinking about Heroku. Here's where both of them might work together. Or here's, man, I'm not sure I could go either way. Both products are fantastic if you color within the lines of what they're good with, and you, depending on, and if you do this upfront analysis right the first time, you're going to save yourself a lot of headache and a lot of heartache and a lot of pain to your wallet down the road.
The worst kind of pain.
Yeah. And so, guys, thank you so much for your time today. Normally, I know we go through some other stuff, but this is a big article, and this is a very, very common use case for Heroku, how to use it, why, how it relates to Salesforce. This one comes up all the time, and we frankly could probably talk another hour of different use cases of how they both work together and whatnot.
Oh, come on, let's just be honest with our viewers. You back channeled me to tell me to wrap it up, because I could definitely go for another 2 hours. I could talk about this all weekend.
Yeah. So again, this is a very exciting use case. We love building these communities. There's a lot of materials on this, but guys, definitely take, if you're looking at an Experience Cloud implementation, check out the resources on Trailhead. They've a lot of great resources on its capabilities, how to get stuff set up, what the WYSIWYG looks like, all those tools. Salesforce has that out of the box. If you're thinking there's a Heroku route, please give Peyton here a call, shoot us an email, hit us up on LinkedIn, whatever. We could go through all the details of your particular use case. And other than that, we should be here next week with another episode.
Yep.
Going over probably some Data Cloud stuff, I think.
Yes, that's the intention.
Yeah, so we'll be talking about Data Cloud next week. But guys, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And unless, Justin, you got some funny jokes, I think we're out.
Well, I mean, you already said that if anybody wanted to reach out to Peyton, because my joke was basically going to be, guys, don't be shy. Peyton bites, but he can't bite you over a remote meeting. So give us a call. We're here to help.
Now I'm out. Bye.
All right. On that note, I think we're done. Peyton will edit it out in post. It's fine.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate the time, and it's good to be back with you all.